The champagne flute slipped from my fingers and shattered on the marble floor of the Grandview Hotel ballroom, sending golden liquid and crystal shards across my Jimmy Choos. 300 of my husband Marcus's colleagues turned to stare as he stood on the makeshift stage, microphone in hand, having just announced to his entire company that he was leaving me for his 23-year-old assistant. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, but what happened next changed everything. When I reached into my clutch and pulled out the envelope I'd been carrying all evening, Marcus's triumphant smile faltered, and by the time I finished reading its contents aloud, he was the one screaming, "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." My name is Sophia Chen, and until that December evening at the Pinnacle Tech Annual Holiday Gala, I thought I understood the man I'd been married to for 12 years. Marcus Chen wasn't just my husband, he was the golden boy of Silicon Valley, the youngest VP in his company's history, the man who could charm investors out of millions with a smile and a PowerPoint presentation. To the outside world, we were the perfect power couple. He was the tech genius with the MBA from Wharton, and I was the corporate lawyer who'd given up her partnership track to support his meteoric rise. We lived in a glass and steel house in Palo Alto that had been featured in Architectural Digest, drove matching Teslas, and hosted dinner parties that were written up in the society pages. But perfection, as I would learn that night, is often just a carefully maintained illusion. The morning of the company party had started like any other December day in Northern California. Fog rolled across the hills as I stood in our kitchen, watching Marcus adjust his tie in the reflection of our sub-zero refrigerator. He was distracted, scrolling through his phone with one hand while attempting to straighten his collar with the other. I walked over and fixed it for him, a gesture so automatic after 12 years that neither of us really noticed it anymore. "Big presentation today," I asked, pouring coffee into his travel mug, the one with "World's Best CEO" printed on it. A joke gift from his team that he'd used every day since his promotion to VP. "The Johnson acquisition," he murmured, still staring at his screen. "If we can close this, it'll be the biggest deal in company history." I smiled, genuinely proud despite the distance that had been growing between us over the past year. "You'll be brilliant. You always are." He looked up then, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt. Maybe. Or regret. But it was gone so quickly I wondered if I'd imagined it. "Thanks, Soph. Hey, about tonight. The holiday party at the Grandview." "I know, my dress arrived yesterday." The silver Versace gown had cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment, but Marcus had insisted. "Image is everything," he always said. "Right." He grabbed his mug and headed for the door, then paused. "Sophia? Yes? Just. Thanks for everything." Looking back, I should have recognized the goodbye hidden in those words. I spent the morning at my home office reviewing contracts for my freelance legal consulting business. After leaving Hartman and Associates 3 years ago, I'd built a small but successful practice that allowed me to work from home and be available for Marcus's increasingly demanding schedule. It wasn't the high-powered career I'd once envisioned, but I told myself it was a choice, a sacrifice I'd made for our marriage. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, Elena Reed. We'd met in law school and she'd been my maid of honor, the one person who'd questioned whether I should give up my partnership track for Marcus. "Lunch at Bistro Max? I have gossip that requires wine and truffle fries." I smiled despite myself. Elena's gossip usually involved which partner at her firm was sleeping with which associate, delivered with the kind of razor-sharp wit that had made her legendary in legal circles. An hour later, we were seated at our usual corner table, a bottle of Sancerre between us. Elena looked impeccable as always in her Armani suit, her red hair pulled back in a sleek chignon that emphasized her cheekbones. "So," she said, raising her glass, "how's life in the Golden Cage, Elena?" I warned, but without much heat. She'd been calling our Palo Alto house the Golden Cage since we'd moved in 5 years ago. "I'm serious, Soph. When's the last time you did something just for yourself? When's the last time you and Marcus had a conversation about something other than his work or his schedule?" I took a sip of wine to avoid answering immediately. The truth was, I couldn't remember. Our conversations had become transactional, logistics about dinner parties, scheduling conflicts, which charity galas required our attendance. We're fine, I said finally. Just busy. You know how it is during acquisition season. Elena's expression softened. I'm worried about you. You used to light up a courtroom, and now you're I don't know, dimmed. I'm not dimmed, I protested. I'm just evolved. Marriage is about compromise. Compromise implies both people are giving something up, Elena said carefully. What has Marcus compromised on exactly? I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it. The silence stretched between us. Just promise me something, Elena said finally. Promise me you'll remember who you were before you became Mrs. Marcus Chen. That woman was pretty spectacular, I promised, though at the time I didn't understand why she looked so sad when I did. The afternoon passed in a blur of preparations for the party. Marcus had texted that he'd be late. The Johnson meeting was running long, so I should take a car to the hotel and he'd meet me there. It wasn't unusual. I'd attended enough corporate functions solo to navigate the small talk and networking with ease. I spent an hour at the salon having my hair styled into an elegant updo that showed off the diamond earrings Marcus had given me for our 10th anniversary. The makeup artist worked her magic, transforming my tired eyes into something that photographed beautifully under ballroom light. By the time I slipped into the silver Versace, I looked like the wife of a Silicon Valley executive should look: polished, expensive, untouchable. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent more time preparing for this party than I'd spent on myself in months. The car arrived at 6:30, a black town car with a driver who called me Mrs. Chen, and helped me navigate the dresses train as I slid into the back seat. As we drove through the Friday evening traffic towards San Francisco, I stared out at the city lights and tried to shake the feeling of unease that had been building all day. Something was different about this party. Marcus had been strangely insistent that I attend, even though I'd mentioned I might skip it due to a deadline on a contract review. You have to be there, he'd said, with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to just another company party. It's important. The Grandview Hotel was a San Francisco landmark, all marble columns and crystal chandeliers, the kind of place where old money mingled with new tech wealth. As the car pulled up to the entrance, I could see the party was already in full swing through the massive window. Women in designer gowns air-kissed while their husbands discussed stock options and IPOs. Have a wonderful evening, Mrs. Chen, the driver said, as the valet helped me from the car. Thank you, I replied, though wonderful wasn't the word I would have chosen for how I expected the evening to go. The ballroom was spectacular, transformed into a winter wonderland with silver and white decorations that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. Ice sculptures shaped like the company logo stood on every table, and a string quartet played classical versions of pop songs in the corner. I accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter and began the familiar dance of corporate wife: smile, nod, ask about children and vacation homes, deflect questions about when Marcus and I would start a family of our own. Sophia, you look absolutely stunning. Cheryl Morrison, the CEO's wife, glided over in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and burgundy silk. Marcus must be so proud to have you on his arm. Thank you, Cheryl. You look lovely as well. I'd learned long ago that conversations at these events were more about ritual than actual communication. Where is that handsome husband of yours? I heard the Johnson deal went through today. Such exciting news. He's running a bit late, I said, scanning the crowd. You know how he is about celebrating before everything's finalized. Cheryl laughed, the practiced laugh of a woman who'd been playing the corporate wife game far longer than I had. Oh, these tech boys and their superstitions. My herald won't even say the word acquisition until the papers are signed. We chatted for a few more minutes about nothing of consequence. The weather, the decorations, the new yoga studio in Palo Alto that everyone was raving about. I was about to excuse myself to find the ladies' room when a commotion near the stage caught my attention. Marcus had arrived, but he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm, was Brittany Walsh, his assistant. I'd met her a handful of times at company functions. A pretty blonde fresh out of Stanford with an MBA and ambitions that were clear to anyone who paid attention. She was wearing a red dress that left little to the imagination, and the way she looked up at Marcus made my stomach turn. Oh my, Cheryl murmured beside me, That's quite a dress. I didn't respond. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I was too busy watching my husband guide his assistant through the crowd, his hand on the small of her back in a gesture that was far too familiar for a professional relationship. They were laughing at something, heads bent close together, oblivious to the stares they were attracting. Or maybe not oblivious, maybe that was the point. "Excuse me," I said to Cheryl, my voice surprisingly steady. "I should go say hello to my husband." I started across the ballroom, my heels clicking on the marble floor. But before I could reach them, Marcus had climbed onto the small stage where the quartet had been playing. Someone handed him a microphone, and he tapped it twice to get everyone's attention. "Good evening, everyone." His voice boomed through the speakers, and the crowd turned toward him like flowers toward the sun. Marcus had always been a natural performer, comfortable in front of any audience. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate, not just the holidays, but what has been an incredible year for Pinnacle Tech." Applause rippled through the room. I stopped where I was, about 20 feet from the stage, still holding my champagne flute. Brittany had positioned herself at the front of the crowd, gazing up at Marcus with an expression of pure adoration. "As many of you know," Marcus continued, "today we finalized the Johnson acquisition, the biggest deal in our company's history." The applause was louder this time, mixed with cheers and whistles. Marcus held up his hand for quiet, his smile growing wider. He looked handsome up there in his custom Tom Ford suit, the lights catching the silver threads in his black hair. For a moment I remembered why I'd fallen in love with him all those years ago in law school. The confidence, the charm, the way he could make you feel like you were the only person in the room when he focused his attention on you. "But tonight," he said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, "I want to talk about something even more important than acquisitions or quarterly earnings. I want to talk about authenticity, about having the courage to live your truth, even when it's difficult." A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't the usual corporate party speech about teamwork and innovation. I felt the first prickle of real alarm run down my spine. "For too long," Marcus continued, "I've been living a lie, pretending to be someone I'm not, staying in a situation that wasn't true to who I really am. But life is too short for that kind of dishonesty." The room had gone completely silent now, even the waiters had stopped circulating, frozen in place with their trays of canapés and champagne. I saw Jonathan Reed, Marcus's business partner, exchange a worried glance with his wife. Several people had taken out their phones, sensing that something momentous was about to happen. "So tonight, in front of all of you, my colleagues, my friends, my chosen family, I want to announce that I'm finally choosing happiness. I'm choosing love, real love." He extended his hand toward Brittany, who climbed the steps to join him on stage, her face glowing with triumph. The red dress looked even more inappropriate under the bright lights, and I noticed she was wearing a necklace I'd never seen before, a diamond pendant that caught the light like a small star. "I'm leaving my wife," Marcus announced, his arm going around Brittany's waist. "I'm choosing to be with someone who understands me, who supports my dreams, who makes me want to be a better man, someone who doesn't try to hold me back or make me feel guilty for my success." The champagne flute slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a crash that seemed impossibly loud in the silent ballroom. Golden liquid splashed across my silver shoes, and shards of crystal scattered like diamonds around my feet. 300 heads turned to stare at me, their expressions ranging from shock to pity, to poorly concealed excitement at witnessing such premium gossip. I stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe, as my husband continued his public destruction of our marriage. "Sophia and I have grown apart," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the speakers. "She's a good woman, but she's not the right woman for me. She never understood the demands of my career, never fully supported my ambition. While I was building something revolutionary here at Pinnacle, she was content to stay home, to live off my success without contributing anything of her own." The words hit me like physical blow. I thought of the partnership I'd given up, the cases I'd turned down, the late nights I'd spent alone while he worked, telling myself it was temporary, that we were building something together. "But Brittany," He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was one I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Brittany gets it. She's not just my assistant, she's my partner in every sense of the word. She challenges me, inspires me, makes me believe that anything is possible. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Is this really happening?" And the spell broke slightly. People began murmuring to each other, phones came out more openly, and I knew that within minutes, this would be all over social media. The wife who'd been publicly dumped at the company holiday party, the cliché of the executive leaving his wife for his younger assistant, played out in front of 300 witnesses. But I couldn't focus on that. All I could see was the envelope in my clutch, the one I'd been carrying all evening, the one that contained information that would change everything. You see, what Marcus didn't know, what he'd been too busy with Brittany to notice, was that I hadn't been as oblivious as he thought. 3 weeks ago, I'd received an anonymous email. No subject line, no message, just an attachment, a PDF of credit card statements, not our joint credit card, but a corporate card in Marcus's name. The charges told a story: hotel rooms in the middle of the day, expensive dinners for two at restaurants I'd never been to, jewelry purchases from Tiffany that hadn't resulted in any gifts for me. At first I'd tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were client dinner. Maybe the jewelry was for corporate gifts. But then I'd done what any lawyer would do. I'd investigated. I'd hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent, named James Morrison, who specialized in corporate fraud. What he'd found went far beyond a simple affair. Marcus hadn't just been sleeping with Brittany, he'd been embezzling from the company, using the Johnson acquisition as cover to funnel money into offshore accounts he'd opened in Brittany's name, making her complicit in his crime whether she knew it or not. The evidence was damning: falsified invoices, inflated contractor fees, kickbacks from vendors that went directly into their personal accounts. The affair was tawdry, the embezzlement was criminal, and I had the proof right there in my clutch. As Marcus continued his speech about authenticity and living his truth, I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. My movement caught his eye, and for the first time since he'd started speaking, he looked directly at me. His expression was a mixture of guilt and defiance, as if daring me to make a scene. "I know this is unconventional," he was saying, "but I believe in transparency, I believe in honesty, and honestly, Sophia and I haven't been happy for a long time. She knows it, I know it, and now all of you know it. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is set someone free to find their own happiness." Set me free, as if I was a bird he'd been keeping in a cage rather than a woman who'd sacrificed her career for him. I started walking toward the stage, the envelope in my hand. My heels crunched on the broken glass from the champagne flute, but I didn't care. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, everyone stepping back as if my humiliation might be contagious. "Sophia," Marcus said into the microphone, his voice taking on a warning tone, "this isn't the time or place." "Oh, I think it's exactly the time and place," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Since you've chosen to make our private life public, I think your colleagues deserve to know the whole truth." I climbed the steps to the stage, grateful for all those barriclasses that kept me steady despite my shaking hand. Brittany shrank back as I approached, her triumph fading into uncertainty. "You want to talk about authenticity?" I said, taking the microphone from Marcus's unresisting hand. "Let's talk about authenticity." I opened the envelope and pulled out the first document. "This is an invoice for the Johnson acquisition. It says you paid Henderson Consulting $3 million for their services." I held it up so the crowd could see, except Henderson Consulting doesn't exist. It's a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, in Brittany's name. The murmur from the crowd grew louder. I saw Jonathan Reed push his way to the front, his face white with shock. As CFO, this was his worst nightmare. "This one," I pulled out another paper, "shows a payment of $500,000 to a vendor called Tech Supply Solutions, also registered to Brittany." "Sophia, stop," Marcus hissed, reaching for the microphone. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." I stepped away from him, keeping the microphone. "I understand that while I was at home, supposedly contributing nothing, you were stealing from the company that made you rich. I understand that your authentic love is based on fraud and embezzlement. Brittany's face had gone from red to white. Marcus, what is she talking about? Those companies, you said they were legitimate subsidiaries. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. And here's my favorite, I said, pulling out the final document. A reservation at the St. Regis for December 15th. That's today, for the honeymoon suite. Were you planning to celebrate your grand announcement, or were you going to run? Because this, I held up another paper, is a flight manifest for a private jet to Costa Rica, leaving tonight at midnight. 2 passengers, Marcus Chen and Brittany Walsh. The ballroom erupted. Jonathan Reed was already on his phone, presumably calling the company's legal team. Security guards appeared at the exits, standard protocol when embezzlement was suspected. Someone screamed, "Call the police." Marcus lunged for me then, his face contorted with rage. "You fucking bitch. You don't know what you've done." But before he could reach me, 2 security guards were on him, holding him back. He struggled against them, all pretense of the suave executive gone, replaced by a cornered animal. "You were supposed to be humiliated," he screamed. "You were supposed to run away crying, that was the plan. Public humiliation, so bad you'd give me whatever I wanted in the divorce. No questions, no looking at the finances, just gone." "Well," I said into the microphone, my voice still eerily calm, "I guess we both had plans." The police arrived within minutes. Someone must have called them as soon as I'd mentioned embezzlement. As they led Marcus away in handcuffs, he was still screaming, alternating between threats against me and pleas to Brittany, who was being questioned by another set of officers. I handed the microphone to a shell-shocked event coordinator and walked off the stage. The crowd parted again, but this time the looks were different. All respect, even admiration. Someone started clapping, and soon the entire room was applauding. I didn't want their applause, I just wanted to go home. But home was a glass house in Palo Alto that had never really felt like mine, filled with furniture Marcus had chosen, and art that was more about impressing guests than bringing joy. Elena found me in the parking lot, where I was standing beside a potted palm tree, finally allowing myself to shake. She must have driven like a maniac to get there from Palo Alto so quickly. "Jesus Christ, Sophia," she said, wrapping me in a fierce hug. "That was the most badass thing I've ever seen in my life." "I think I'm going to throw up," I said against her shoulder. "That's okay, you just destroyed a man who tried to destroy you in front of 300 witnesses. You're allowed to throw up. You're allowed to do whatever you want." The valet brought Elena's car around, and she bundled me into the passenger seat. As we drove away from the Grandview Hotel, I could see news vans already arrive. By morning the story would be everywhere. The wife who'd turned the tables on her cheating, embezzling husband in the most public way possible. "Where to?" Elena asked. "Your house." "God, no," I said. "I can't go back there, not tonight." "My place then. I've got wine, ice cream, and a guest room that's been waiting for you since the day you married that asshole." I laughed, surprising myself. It was a broken sound, more sob than laugh, but it was real. "Elena," I said as we merged onto 101. "Yeah, thank you for trying to warn me. All those times you questioned my choices, tried to remind me who I used to be. I should have listened." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You listened when it mattered. You listened to yourself tonight. That woman on that stage, that was the Sophia Chen I went to law school with. The one who was going to set the world on fire." As the lights of San Francisco faded behind us, I thought about fire. About how sometimes you had to burn everything down to see clearly. Marcus had tried to publicly humiliate me, to destroy my dignity in front of his entire company. Instead, he'd set me free in a way I never could have done myself. The golden cage was open, and for the first time in 12 years, I was ready to fly. The next morning arrived with a hangover that had nothing to do with alcohol and everything to do with emotional devastation. I woke in Elena's guest room to find 37 missed calls on my phone, hundreds of text messages, and my email inbox so full it had stopped accepting new messages. The story had gone viral overnight. Tech executive arrested for embezzlement. after wife exposes fraud at company party was trending on 3 different social media platforms, complete with shaky phone footage of Marcus being led away in handcuffs while screaming threats. Elena appeared in the doorway with coffee and her laptop. So, you're famous, or infamous. I'm not sure which applies when you publicly destroy your husband at a corporate event. I groaned and pulled a pillow over my head. Please tell me last night was a nightmare. Oh, it was a nightmare all right, just one that happened to be recorded by 300 smartphones. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the pillow away. But seriously, Soph, you need to see this. The response has been unexpected. She turned her laptop toward me. The screen showed a Twitter thread that had gone viral overnight. Someone named A Tech Wife Warrior had written, "Can we talk about how Sophia Chen just became every betrayed spouse's hero? This woman found out her husband was not only cheating but stealing, and instead of crying or causing a scene, she brought receipts. Literal receipts. Queen behavior." The thread had thousands of replies. Most supportive, some critical, all passionate. Women were sharing their own stories of discovering affairs, of sacrificing careers for ungrateful spouses, of being publicly humiliated, only to be told they were overreacting. My story had touched a nerve I hadn't even known existed. There's more, Elena said, scrolling down. 3 major law firms have already reached out, wanting to hire you. Apparently, taking down a corrupt executive on stage is better than any job interview. And get this, Netflix wants to buy the rights to your story. I stared at her. Netflix? It happened less than 12 hours ago. Welcome to the digital age, babe. Your humiliation and triumph were live-streamed. You're not just a scorned wife, you're a symbol. A symbol. I'd spent 12 years trying to be the perfect corporate wife, invisible and supportive, only to become a symbol by burning it all down in the most visible way possible. My phone rang again. This time I recognized the number. Hartman and Associates, my old law firm. Sophia, Richard Hartman's gravelly voice filled my ear. I just wanted to say that your position is still open if you want it. Senior partner track, corner office, the works. That performance last night showed exactly the kind of lawyer we need. Richard, I don't answer now, take your time. But Sophia, what you did took guts. We could use more of that around here. As I hung up, Elena was grinning. See? Phoenix rising from the ashes and all that. But I didn't feel like a phoenix. I felt like a woman who detonated a bomb in her own life and was now standing in the rubble, unsure what to rebuild or whether to rebuild at all. The doorbell rang, and Elena went to answer it, returning with a massive bouquet of white roses. The card read, "To the bravest woman in Silicon Valley, we're all rooting for you. The Wives Club." The Wives Club? I asked. Elena's expression darkened. Oh honey, you don't know about the Wives Club. It's the unofficial support group for Silicon Valley spouses. They meet every Wednesday at the country club. I always thought it was just for gossip and wine, but apparently, they've been documenting their husbands' affairs and financial crimes for years. You just became their patron saint. Over the next few days, the scope of Marcus's embezzlement became clearer. The FBI had gotten involved, freezing accounts and seizing assets. The total stolen was close to $15 million, spread across dozens of shell companies and hidden accounts. Brittany, it turned out, had been more accomplice than victim. She'd actively helped create the fake companies, though she claimed Marcus had told her it was for tax purposes. I met with the federal prosecutor, a sharp woman named Dana Fitzgerald, who looked at me with something between admiration and pity. Your evidence is impeccable, she said, spreading out the documents I'd provided. Your private investigator did excellent work. But I have to ask, why didn't you go to the authorities first? Why the public spectacle? I'd been asking myself the same question. The truth was complicated and not entirely noble. He was going to leave me that night anyway, I said finally. He'd planned the whole thing. The public humiliation, the announcement, even had the honeymoon suite booked. If I'd gone to the police quietly, he would have spun it as the bitter ex-wife trying to ruin him. I gestured to the stack of newspapers on her desk, all featuring variations of the same story. This way, everyone saw the truth in real time. He couldn't control the narrative. Dana nodded slowly. Well, it certainly worked. His lawyers are already talking plea deal. The public nature of his confession, the witnesses, your documentation, he doesn't have a leg to stand on. As I left the federal building, my phone rang with another unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Chen, this is Patricia Morrison. I was at the party last night. I'm Harold Morrison's wife. The CEO. I remembered her vaguely, an elegant woman in her 60s who'd always been kind at corporate events. I'm hosting a gathering tomorrow evening, she continued. Nothing formal, just some women who understand what you're going through. We'd be honored if you'd join us, the Wives Club. I'd been officially invited into the secret society I hadn't even known existed. I appreciate the invitation, Patricia, but I'm not sure I'm ready for. My dear, she interrupted gently. None of us were ready. That's rather the point. Tomorrow at 7, the Atherton estate. The gate code is 9. And Sophia, what you did last night gave a lot of us hope. Sometimes the cage door has been open all along. We just needed someone to show us it was possible to walk through it. Elena drove me to the Atherton estate the next evening. The Morrison property was old money, elegant. The kind of place that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. The circular driveway was filled with luxury cars. Bentleys, Ferraris. A few Teslas for the environmentally conscious wealthy. You sure about this? Elena asked as I checked my reflection in the mirror. I'd chosen a simple black dress, understated but expensive, armor for whatever awaited inside. No, I admitted, but hiding isn't an option anymore. Might as well see what the infamous Wives Club is all about. Patricia Morrison met me at the door herself, bypassing what I assumed was an army of household staff. She was wearing cashmere and pearls, the uniform of her generation's wealthy women, but her eyes were sharp with intelligence. Sophia, darling. Welcome, come, everyone's eager to meet you. She led me through a home that belonged in a museum, all priceless art and antique furniture, to a sitting room where about 20 women were gathered. I recognized some from corporate events. The wives who smiled and made small talk while their husbands discussed deals that shaped the tech industry. But tonight, they looked different. Maskless, real. Ladies, Patricia announced. Sophia, Chen. The room erupted in applause. Not the polite, golf clap applause of corporate events, but genuine, heartfelt celebration. Several women had tears in their eyes. A younger woman, maybe early 30s, approached first. I'm Jennifer Liu. My husband runs a crypto startup. Last year I found out he'd been hiding assets in blockchain wallets. When I confronted him privately, he laughed and said I'd never understand the technology enough to prove anything. She smiled fiercely. I spent 6 months learning everything about cryptocurrency. Now I'm teaching a course on blockchain forensics for divorce attorneys. Another woman, older, with perfectly styled gray hair, touched my arm. Margaret Zhao. My husband had 3 families. 3. One here, one in Shanghai, one in London. I found out when the other wives contacted me. They'd discovered each other and tracked me down. We're all friends now. We vacation together. Story after story poured out. Affairs discovered through forgotten browser histories. Hidden assets revealed by suspicious tax returns. Emotional abuse disguised as concern for their stability. Physical abuse hidden behind designer sunglasses and careful makeup. But why stay silent? I asked finally. Why not expose them like I did? Patricia poured me a glass of wine. Chateau Margaux. I noted even secret support groups had standards in Atherton. Because, my dear, you had evidence of criminal activity that protected you legally. Most of us only have evidence of being assholes, which unfortunately isn't illegal. She sipped her wine thoughtfully. But we've been documenting everything. financial records, behavioral patterns, connections between companies. What started as self-protection has become something more. A woman I recognized as the wife of a prominent venture capitalist leaned forward. Did you know that 60% of Silicon Valley's successful companies have some form of financial irregularity, hidden debts, inflated valuations, embezzled funds? And guess who often discovers these irregularities first? The wives, I said quietly. The wives, she confirmed. We see the late-night panic attacks, the sudden expensive purchases to hide losses, the affairs that start when the pressure mounts. We're the early warning system that everyone ignores. Patricia stood and walked to an oil painting on the wall. A pastoral scene that looked like a moon. She pressed something, and the painting swung open to reveal a safe. This, she said, pulling out several thick folders, is what we call the insurance files, documentation on 43 executives in Silicon Valley. Nothing we'd use unless necessary. But she smiled. And it wasn't entirely nice. Insurance, I stared at the folders. Understanding dawning. You're not just a support group, you're protecting ourselves and each other. Patricia finished. Your husband thought public humiliation would destroy you. Instead, you destroyed him with truth. That's what we do here. We weaponize truth. Over the following weeks, I became a regular at the Wives Club gatherings. Not all were at Patricia's estate. We met at different homes, always secure, always private. I learned about forensic accounting from women who'd had to track down hidden millions. I learned about digital security from a former NSA analyst who'd married a tech mogul. I learned that behind every successful Silicon Valley executive was often a spouse who'd sacrificed their own dreams, only to be discarded when they were no longer useful. But I also learned about rebuilding. Jennifer Liu had started her own blockchain consulting firm. Margaret Zhao had written a best-selling memoir about her husband's triple life. Patricia Morrison sat on 12 boards and controlled more wealth than most of the executives who dismissed her as just a wife. The mistake they all make, Patricia told me one evening, is assuming we're decorative, that we don't pay attention, that we can't understand their business. She smiled. My husband still doesn't know that I have an MBA from Harvard. Got it through night classes while he thought I was at book club. My divorce proceedings moved forward with surprising speed. Marcus's assets were frozen pending the criminal investigation. But my lawyer, recommended by the Wives Club, was brilliant at separating my premarital assets and the legitimate earnings from our life together from his stolen funds. Marcus tried to contact me repeatedly from jail, his messages alternating between rage and pleading. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. I accepted the position at Hartman and Associates, returning to law with a hunger I'd forgotten I possessed. My first case was representing a woman whose tech executive husband had hidden assets in cryptocurrency. Jennifer Liu served as my expert witness. We won. 6 months after the party, I was in my new corner office when my assistant knocked. Miss Chen? There's a James Morrison here to see you. Says you know him. James Morrison, the private investigator who'd uncovered Marcus's embezzlement. I hadn't spoken to him since paying his final invoice. He entered looking the same. Unremarkable in that way good investigators cultivate. Forgettable face. Forgettable clothes. Unforgettable results. Miss Chen, congratulations on the partnership. Thank you, and thank you again for your work. Without your investigation, that's actually why I'm here. He sat down, pulled out a tablet. I've been hired to investigate some irregularities at several tech companies. The thing is, these irregularities follow patterns that match other cases I've worked. He paused. Cases for other wives. I kept my expression neutral. I'm not sure I understand. I think you do. The Wives Club isn't just documenting financial crimes for protection, they're actively investigating, building cases, and now they're starting to act on them. He showed me a news article from that morning. A prominent venture capitalist had been arrested for tax fraud. The evidence had been delivered anonymously to the IRS, meticulously documented and impossible to refute. Richard Wang, I said, recognizing the name. His wife Caroline is. I stopped myself. Is a member of your club? Yes. James leaned back. Look, I'm not here to threaten anyone. Actually, I'm here to offer my services. Officially, the work you're all doing. It's important, but it's also dangerous. You need professional help. I studied him carefully. What makes you think we need help? Because 3 more executives are about to be exposed. I've seen the pattern. Someone's been very busy digging into financial records, shell companies, offshore accounts. Good work, but amateur. You're leaving digital fingerprints. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Emergency meeting tonight. We may have a problem. James smiled slightly. Let me guess. Someone noticed the investigations. That night's meeting was tense. Several husbands had received anonymous warnings. Stop the affairs, return the stolen money, or face exposure. The warnings had been sent from untraceable email accounts. But somehow suspicion was falling on the wives. Harold asked me point blank if I knew anything about Richard Wang's arrest. Patricia said, he's never asked about my activities before. They're getting nervous. Caroline Wang looked exhausted but satisfied. Richard's in jail. That's what mattered. 20 years of hiding money while I raised our children and smiled at his investors. Now they know who he really is. But at what cost? Asked another woman. If they figure out we're working together, they already know. I interrupted, remembering James's visit. The patterns are too obvious. We need to be smarter. I told them about James Morrison. His offer to help. The room divided immediately. Some saw it as an opportunity. Others as a threat. How do we know he won't expose us? Jennifer asked. Because he makes his living on discretion, I replied. And because he believes in what we're doing. He's seen too many women destroyed by powerful men. He wants to help level the playing field. Patricia stood, commanding attention as always. Let's vote. All in favor of bringing in professional help? Hands raised slowly. Not all, but enough. Motion carried. Patricia said. Sophia, arrange a meeting. But make it clear, he works for us, not the other way around. As the meeting dispersed, Caroline Huang pulled me aside. I wanted to thank you personally. What you did that night at the party. It gave me courage. Richard always said I was too stupid to understand his business. Turns out, I understood it well enough to document every crime. Walking to my car, I thought about transformation. 6 months ago, I'd been a corporate wife in a golden cage, diminished and dismissed. Now I was a partner in a major law firm and part of something bigger, a network of women who'd turned their pain into power, their knowledge into weapons. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from an unknown number. Miss Chen, I'm a reporter with the Washington Post. I'm working on a story about financial crimes in Silicon Valley and the role of spouses in exposing them. I'd love to talk to you about your experience and the rumored wives club. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. I stared at the message, knowing it represented a crossroads. Going public with the wives club would mean protection through visibility, but also scrutiny. Staying secret meant continued effectiveness, but constant risk of exposure. I forwarded the message to Patricia with a simple question. Thoughts? Her response came quickly. Come to the estate. Bring Elena. It's time we discussed the next phase. The next phase, because of course there was a next phase. What had started as self-protection had evolved into something larger, a reckoning for an industry built on the backs of people it considered disposable. As I drove through the Silicon Valley night, past the gleaming headquarters of companies worth billions, I thought about all the women inside those glass towers, the assistants having affairs with their bosses, the wives sitting at home, wondering why their husbands worked such late hours, the female executives hitting glass ceilings held in place by men who saw them as threats or conquests, but never equals. Change was coming to Silicon Valley. It wasn't arriving through board meetings or diversity initiatives or sensitivity training. It was arriving through the people who'd been underestimated for too long, The wives who'd been watching, learning, documenting. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Marcus's lawyer, Miss Chen. I'm calling to inform you that Miss Chen is willing to testify against his co-conspirators in exchange for a reduced sentence. However, he has conditions. Conditions? I almost laughed. He's in federal prison facing 20 years. And he has conditions. He wants a guarantee that you won't pursue any claims against his future earnings or book deals. He's planning to write a memoir about his experiences. This time I did laugh. A memoir. Let me guess. How my vindictive wife destroyed my American dream. Something like that. The lawyer sounded tired. He probably was. Will you agree to his terms? Tell Marcus he can write whatever he wants. But also tell him that I kept copies of everything. Every email, every text, every photo from his phone that he thought he'd deleted. If he lies about me in print, I'll destroy him, again, and this time, I won't need a microphone to do it. I hung up and sat in my car for a moment, looking at the condo I'd rented after leaving the glass house. It was smaller than our old home, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, every decision about how to live in it, all mine. My phone buzzed with one final message of the night, an email from someone named Sarah Winters. Dear Miss Chen, I'm a software engineer at a major tech company. My boss has been sexually harassing me for months, but HR says I don't have enough proof. I saw what you did to your husband. Can you help me? I'm desperate. I stared at the message, feeling the weight of what we'd started. The Wives Club was no longer just about wives. It was about anyone who'd been silenced, dismissed or destroyed by powerful men who thought they were untouchable. I forwarded the message to Patricia with a note. I think we need to expand our membership criteria. Her response was immediate. Agreed, the revolution is growing. Tomorrow we plan. Tonight, celebrate. You're not the woman who was humiliated at that party anymore. She was right, that woman, the one who'd stood frozen as her husband announced he was leaving her for his assistant, was gone. In her place stood someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who understood that the best revenge wasn't just living well, it was making sure the men who'd wronged us could never wrong anyone else again. The golden cage was gone. In its place was something far more powerful: freedom, and the knowledge of how to use it. The Washington Post article dropped on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the reporter first contacted me. The headline read, "The Secret Network of Silicon Valley Wives Exposing Tech's Hidden Crime." Patricia had ultimately decided that controlled exposure was better than investigative journalism catching us off guard. We'd given the reporter Diana Chang exclusive access to our stories, carefully curated, legally vetted, names changed where necessary. The response was immediate and explosive. Within hours, the article had been shared thousands of times. My phone didn't stop ringing. Interview requests from major networks, podcast invitations, and messages from women around the world sharing their own story. But the most interesting response came from an unexpected source. Brittany Walsh requested a meeting. I almost deleted the message, but something in her tone made me pause. She wasn't defiant or accusatory. She sounded broke. We met at a small cafe in Redwood City, far from the tech corridor where we might be recognized. She looked nothing like the triumphant woman in the red dress who'd stood beside Marcus on that stage. Her designer clothes had been replaced with simple jeans and a sweat. The careful makeup was gone. She looked young and tired, and scared. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, wrapping her hands around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to talk to." "You're right," I said simply. "So why am I here?" She looked up then, and I saw tears in her eyes. "Because I need to tell someone the truth, and you're the only person who might actually believe me." Over the next hour, Brittany told me her story, how Marcus had pursued her relentlessly, promising mentorship and career advance, how he'd slowly isolated her from other colleagues, making her dependent on his approval, how the relationship had turned sexual only after he'd made her complicit in the financial crimes. "He told me it was standard practice," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Creating subsidiaries for tax purposes. He said all the executives did it. I was 23 and desperate to succeed. I believed him. Until that night at the party, when you showed those documents, I realized he'd been setting me up from the beginning. My name on everything, his fingerprints on nothing. If you hadn't exposed it publicly, he would have let me take the fall. I studied her carefully. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction at her distress. This was the woman who'd been sleeping with my husband after all. But mostly I felt a familiar anger at Marcus, at the system that allowed men like him to prey on vulnerable women. What do you want from me, Brittany? I want to help, she said firmly. I have information, recordings, emails, details about other executives doing the same thing. I want to testify, but my lawyer says I need allies. The other wives, they'll never accept me. But if you vouched for me, the irony wasn't lost on either of us. The other woman asking the wife for help. But as I looked at her, I saw not my husband's mistress, but another victim of his manipulation. I'll think about it, I said finally. But first you need to understand something. The Wives Club isn't about revenge, it's about justice and protection. If you're looking for a way to reduce your sentence, or rehabilitate your image, we're not interested. I'm looking for a way to make sure no other young woman goes through what I did, she said quietly. Marcus wasn't the only executive using his position to prey on assistants. I have names, dates, evidence, things they said when they thought I was too young and stupid to understand. That changed things. I exchanged numbers with her and promised to discuss it with the group. As I watched her leave, shoulders hunched against the wind, I thought about the complexities of victimhood and complicity. Brittany had made choices, yes, but in a system designed to limit her options, just like I had, in my own way. The Wives Club meeting that week was contentious. Half the women were outraged that I'd even met with Brittany. The other half saw the strategic value in what she offered. She slept with your husband, Caroline Huang said, her usual composure cracking. How can you even look at her? Because she was 23 and he was her boss, I replied evenly. Because he used the same manipulation tactics on her that he used on me, just in a different way. And because she has information that could expose a dozen other men doing the same thing. Patricia, as always, brought order to the chaos. Let's be practical. What exactly does she have? I pulled out the preliminary list Brittany had provided. Recordings of executive meetings where they discussed using assistants as documentation of systematic harassment covered up by NDAs, evidence of quid pro quo arrangements, sex for stock options, affairs for promotions. The room went silent. We'd known about individual cases, but this was evidence of something systemic. Jesus, Jennifer Lou breathed. It's not just financial crimes, it's a culture of predation, Patricia finished. And she's willing to testify. She's already cooperating with the FBI on the financial crimes. This would be separate, a civil suit, maybe criminal charges for the harassment, and assault cases. The vote was closer than I'd expected, but ultimately pragmatism won. Brittany would be brought in as an informant, not a member. Her information would be vetted, verified, and used to build cases against executives who thought their assistants were part of their compensation packages. James Morrison proved invaluable in verifying Brittany's information. Within weeks, he'd corroborated her recordings with testimony from other assistants, built timelines that showed patterns of predatory behavior, and identified financial irregularities that often accompanied the sexual misconduct. Hush money hidden as bonuses, NDAs, disguised as severance packages. The first executive fell on a Thursday. Robert Klein, CEO of a major cloud computing company, was arrested on charges of embezzlement and sexual assault. The evidence was overwhelming. Brittany's recordings, corroborating testimony from 3 other assistants, and financial records showing hundreds of thousands in hush money. The second fell the following Monday, then a third, then 5 more in rapid succession. Silicon Valley was in panic. Emergency board meetings were called. HR departments went into overdrive. Executives who'd never worried about their behavior suddenly found themselves under scrutiny. The Wives Club had evolved from a support group to a force of reckoning, and the entire tech industry was feeling the aftershock. But with visibility came danger. Patricia's husband confronted her directly, accusing her of orchestrating what he called a witch hunt. My own position at the law firm became complicated as partners worried about taking on tech companies as clients. We were making enemies of powerful men, and they were starting to fight back. The counterattack came through lawyers and PR firms. Suddenly, stories appeared questioning our motivations. Opinion pieces asked whether scorned wives could be trusted to provide unbiased evidence. Our personal lives were dissected, our histories examined for any flaw that could discredit us. They went after Brittany first, painting her as a gold digger who'd entrapped innocent men. When that didn't work, the recordings were too damning. They tried to hack our communication. James caught 3 separate attempts to infiltrate our digital security. They're scared, he told us at an emergency meeting. Good, scared people make mistakes. He was right. In their desperation to stop us, several executives made crucial errors. One tried to bribe his former assistant to recant her testimony. She recorded the attempt. Another attempted to destroy evidence, not knowing we'd already backed up everything. A third threatened his wife directly, providing her with grounds for a restraining order and criminal charges. The Washington Post ran a follow-up article, How Silicon Valley's Most Powerful Men Are Trying to Silence Their Wives. Diana Chang had been following our story closely, and the attempted suppression became news itself. Public opinion already shifting in our favor, solidified. We weren't vengeful wives, we were whistleblowers exposing systemic corruption and abuse. 1 year after Marcus's arrest, I stood in a federal courthouse watching him testify against his former colleagues. He'd lost weight in prison, his designer suits replaced with an orange jumpsuit, but his arrogance remained intact as he detailed the financial schemes, always positioning himself as the smartest person in the room, even while admitting to crimes. During a recess we made eye contact. For a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes, regret, maybe, or just recognition of what he'd lost. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar contempt. Enjoying the show? He asked as I passed. Just doing my job, I replied. I was there as legal counsel for 3 of the wives whose husbands Marcus was testifying against. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. You destroyed me, he said quietly. Are you happy now? I considered the question seriously. Was I happy? My marriage was over, my life completely transformed. I'd gone from invisible corporate wife to visible target, but I was also free, successful, part of something meaningful. I didn't destroy you, Marcus. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone saw it happen. He turned away, but not before I saw the truth in his eyes. He still didn't understand, still thought this was about him, about our marriage, about personal vengeance. He couldn't comprehend that he'd been just the catalyst for something much larger. The Wives Club had grown beyond anything we'd imagined. Chapters were forming in New York, Austin, Seattle, anywhere tech money and old-fashioned misogyny intersected. The membership had expanded to include not just wives but girlfriends, assistants, female executives, anyone who'd been silenced or sidelined by powerful men. Patricia Morrison had stepped back from active leadership, passing the torch to a younger generation, but she still hosted monthly gatherings at her estate, now official rather than secret. The art that concealed the safe full of evidence had been replaced with a plaque. The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Elena, who'd become an unofficial member despite never marrying into tech, used her law firm's resources to provide pro bono services to women fighting harassment and discrimination. She'd made partner the same week I had, and we'd celebrated with champagne that didn't end with shattered glass and public humiliation. Sarah Winters, the software engineer who'd reached out after my story went viral, had successfully sued her company for harassment. The settlement was confidential, but she'd used the money to start a nonprofit providing legal support for women in tech. She asked me to join the board, and I accepted. Even Brittany had found her place in our new ecosystem. After serving 6 months in minimum security, the judge had been lenient given her cooperation. She'd started a consulting firm advising companies on preventing financial fraud and sexual harassment. It was redemption through expertise, turning her hard-won knowledge into tools for prevention. The tech industry had changed too, not completely. Systemic problems don't disappear overnight, but significantly. Boards were adding female directors at record rates. HR departments were given real power to investigate complaints. The era of the untouchable tech bro was, if not over, at least challenged. But the real change was in the women. At a recent gathering, I'd looked around Patricia's sitting room and seen transformation. Women who'd been diminished had become powerful. Voices that had been silenced were now being heard. The decorative wives had become decorated leaders. Do you ever regret it? Jennifer Liu asked me, as we stood on Patricia's terrace, looking out over the valley lights. Everything that's happened since that night. I thought about the question, about the price of transformation, the death threats that still occasionally arrived, the lawsuits that tried to silence us, the loss of privacy, of anonymity, of the comfortable life I'd once known. No, I said finally. I regret the years I spent making myself smaller. I regret believing that being a good wife meant being invisible, but that night, everything since. No regrets, even Marcus. I smiled, especially Marcus. He thought he was humiliating me by announcing our divorce publicly. Instead, he gave me the perfect stage to show everyone who he really was. You can't buy that kind of poetic justice. As the evening wound down, I prepared to leave. Tomorrow brought new challenges. A congressional hearing on financial crimes in tech, where I'd testify as an expert witness, a meeting with Diana Chang about a book deal, a strategy session for taking the Wives Club national. At the door, Patricia hugged me. Goodbye. You know what the best part is, she said. They never saw us coming, all those brilliant men, with their algorithms and analytics, and they never calculated for the wives. Driving home through the valley, I passed the Grandview Hotel. They'd remodeled the ballroom. Too many people associated it with that infamous party, but I knew the marble floors were the same ones where my champagne glass had shattered, where my old life had ended, and my new one had begun. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Another woman reaching out, another story of manipulation and betrayal, another request for help. I forwarded it to our intake team. We had an intake team now, and kept driving. The golden cage was gone, replaced by something Marcus and men like him had never anticipated, a network of women who'd weaponized their invisibility, turned their pain into power, and discovered that the best revenge wasn't living well, it was making sure no one else had to live through what they had. The revolution hadn't been televised, it had been whispered in sitting rooms, documented in secret files, and finally shouted from a stage where a man had tried to break a woman, only to find she was already broken, and had rebuilt herself into something unbreakable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.